Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Let's do a quick round of introductions. I'm Derek DeJonghe, VP of Engineering with Right Brain Networks. Trying to get these podcasts kicked off here. Ray, you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Ray Welker, Cloud Solution Engineer at Right Brain Networks. Derek's my boss, so he oversees things here, and I'm here to talk about SDLC today and kind of the idea of implementing security into pipelines.
And Onorio.
Hi, I'm Onorio Catenacci. I'm a software developer for Cover My Meds, and I'm just happy you guys asked me along because I learned so much from these conversations. It's great, I love talking shop, and this is a great way to talk shop.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, glad to have you along. So, cool. I know Joe's here. I don't know if Joe's able to say hi. You can't.
Hey there. Yep. Joe Coleman, Business Development Associate here at Right Brain Networks. So, just sitting under the learning tree today.
Cool. Yeah. So the topic today was security through pipelines, right? Yep. Specifically talking about stuff like, I guess all sorts of stuff, right? So, to me, I think what the topic, the kind of where I wanted to take this was, Kevin's joined. Kevin, you're able to speak? I don't know. I hope people are able to kind of join in and unmute themselves. I don't know if looks like
we're just doing intros.
Yeah, we're just doing intros.
Yeah, I'm able to mute and unmute without a problem, so I don't know.
Yeah, I know that I'm not sure if this is a webinar thing where it allows only certain people to talk or not, but.
Well, I don't know if I'm
yeah, we can hear you
on the list, so if you can hear me, then it's probably good.
Hey Kevin, how you doing? Welcome in. Welcome back.
Doing all right. Yeah, thank you.
Kevin's another engineer architect here with Right Brain. We're just getting started, Kevin. Today's topic is security through pipelines. I think kind of the topic that I wanted to talk about is, not like, I guess, all sorts of stuff, right? In general, I think there's some inherent security to, doing your builds and deploys through pipelines instead of, manually. So there's that aspect. I did want to touch on things like static code analysis, and also like security scanning, like once it's actually running, kind of making sure that's built into the overall software development lifecycle. So
that aligns with what I wanted to talk about.
That's good. So yeah, I think in general, just using a pipeline and a build like CI/CD, I think provides a little bit of security because you don't have people doing stuff manually, uploading artifacts and stuff like that. You kind of have a little bit of integrity, I guess is the right word.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to make sure. I was going to say, you got to make sure when you do that kind of thing that there's no way. Well, it's hard to keep you from trying to bypass that stuff. It's like if you've got built into your pipeline to run a static code analysis, it does you no good if people bypass the pipeline.
That is true. So kind of, I guess, developers or somebody who's trying to say like, build their feature branch or something like that, and they don't want to go through the static code analysis because it's extra hoops to go through, so they just bypass it completely and do a deployment. Is that kind of
right? Yeah, that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. And luckily, I will say most of the developers I know are smart enough not to do that. They're like, hey, static code analysis is a good thing.
Yep.
But occasionally it's like, oh my God, I gotta get this going, and I got a deadline, and and then all caution is thrown to the wind.
Well, it can, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of false positives too that can be, identified with the static code analysis, because it doesn't necessarily always do the best job at, I would say, understanding code logic. There's a lot of aspects the tool has to keep in mind when it's examining your code. But yeah, that can lead to developer downtime downtime to deployments as well. If you have a lot of false positives that you need to sort through every time. Or maybe you're not seeing the most benefit out of the results from that tool. So I think it does sometimes take it takes a intuitive approach to ensuring that your tests are meaningful.
Yeah, that's an excellent caveat there. Yeah, you got to always, it's like everything else with software engineering. Don't just blindly trust that it's right. You got to check it.
Yeah. And with like static code analysis, I mean, like the idea is like, right, with security and pipelines is to kind of shift left, take that mentality and kind of implement security in the earlier stages of your deployment lifecycle. That's, I guess, the approach overall, and kind of moving away from like a traditional security approach where you're maybe testing after you're running through all these tests after deployment, or you're allowing like manual audits of code. It kind of making everyone's life easier a little bit, and just automating some of those processes is, I guess, the overall idea. And there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Yeah, you touched on one of my favorite terms, Ray, shifting left. That scanning for security before even gets into any environment, even a dev environment, is like, that's such an opportunity for just building better code and building resiliency into everyday practice.
Yeah. And there's the shifting left idea. Overall, just taking all of that, which would be done at a later point, and trying to shift as much to the earlier stages of that development life cycle, so you have smoother deployments to production. Or because you don't want to be resolving issues in a production environment necessarily. I can think of certain things that maybe you aren't able to 100% catch prior, but like if you adopt a lot of the methodologies of shifting left and a proper like deployment lifecycle to like a dev stage prod environment, you can implement other areas of security like dynamic code testing as well, for testing for things like SQL injections, or testing logins or connectivity overall. I guess there's a lot of different components to that shifting left model, but not everything can be done at the start of or before deployment.
Yeah. But the more that you can front load, the better, right? Like, so often is security an afterthought. Like I've seen a lot of projects go in a really bad way because, so a team has, put together an architecture, they've gone through and done the builds, and then they say, okay, now that we've got something we think is ready to go to production and we've got only 2 weeks left, let's go see if security can approve this or not. When really they should have been in the room at the beginning of the conversation, in the architecture discussions and things like that, because and I think that's a huge culture thing, right? Like people, a lot of the times you'll see people be like, oh, we don't want to talk to security because they're just going to tell us no. right? Well,
Right.
a lot of that comes from, you know, security teams having to tell people no because they get brought in the 11th hour and they weren't consulted, and they say, hey, if you would have asked me to look at this, you know, at the beginning of the project, maybe it wouldn't have been such a big deal, but now you guys are afraid to talk to us because you've put it off so long, and you know you've made decisions that, you know, bypass security. So you know that there's going to be stuff that you have to rectify, like, you know, go back and make right before we can approve this to go to production. So it's like, it's kind of a culture issue that kind of like compounds on itself because of, you know, it is like building security into your workflow does take work, and it's something that needs to be valued. And I think that needs to come from the top, right? The, you know, product and project management need to, you know, see value in security, and not see it as just a, you know, oh, that adds to my timeline. Yeah, well, it adds to my timeline, but it reduces the risk, right? So like everybody, you know, from top down and back and forth need to, you know, see security as a benefit and see the value in it, and really, you know, put an effort towards putting putting that effort into get it in before it's an afterthought, you know?
Right. I you know, and here's a perfect example of, security is a nuisance until somebody hacks into your system, is Equifax, right? They knew, or at least my understanding is they knew there was a vulnerability in their version of Tomcat, I think it was, that they wanted to patch. And, you know, it's like, oh, don't worry about it, we'll patch it later. And then somebody hacked in and grabbed, you know, tons of information. And now it's not a nuisance, it's a gigantic embarrassment for the company and a gigantic, security
embarrassment for the company. It put everybody in America in a vulnerable situation.
Exactly.
Yep.
You know, it's so crazy that, you know, identity theft is such a serious thing, but like that, you know, people's data in general is like everybody. I can probably guarantee that absolutely every single person in the United States has their social security leaked by some sort of some sort of hack. But you know, this single number unlocks all of our, you know, access to this just absolutely insane thing called credit score, you know, and it puts us all in this vulnerable situation. It's like, it's unbelievable that here we are in 2022 and we still don't have an answer for this. You know, I've had to freeze my credit because there was a hack of some mortgage lender company that I've never done business with, don't have any relationship with. They had my data, they lost it. And I've been, you know, people have been opening checking accounts in my name, and I have to go and squash them all over the place. Wow. So I've had to, and you know, you can open you can open checking accounts without having to do credit checks. So, you know, I'm continually having to go play whack-a-mole because these companies are, you know, not being responsible with the data that they shouldn't have in the first place. It's all right. I'm gonna settle down now.
One of the things I wanted to mention, it seems to me like static code analysis is good. I think in the last, I don't know, 10 years, I guess I would say that the way we build software has changed a lot, because we're now relying a lot more on packages like, hey, I pull in these NPM packages from this these JavaScript packages from this server. And so now the vulnerability may not be in my code anymore. It might be in a package I pulled in, and I need to be aware of that too. And I think that's a huge security hole, because a lot of people just trust that these packages are okay. And how do you know? You know?
Yeah, you use static code analysis, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And you know, there's tools, right? Like I think GitHub is doing a really good job in that realm, where they're scanning your dependencies and letting you know if you've got upstream security vulnerabilities. I'm not sure of what other tools are doing that.
Like Sonar Cube as well, right? Wouldn't that include some tools?
Yeah, definitely. But I don't know if it like automatically looks. I think you might have to have your dependency and kind of like send it your dependencies. I know GitHub. I think GitHub like checks your dependency files on a regular basis and alerts you.
Yeah,
it's not just at build time.
Again, is this notion of treating security as a nuisance rather than a primary concern. It's like, I could swear I saw, and it's been several years now, but I saw some academic paper where they did a survey of production sites and found like 35% of them had known vulnerabilities in the JavaScript they had there. Like this was not even like, oh, this might be a theoretical vulnerability. Like, these were known vulnerabilities that were in production sites that, and it's like, how could you not, not be concerned about that? How could you not be worried about people hacking into you? And it's not that hard to fix either. It's just upgrade your version,
Yeah. I think again that goes back to the point that it is kind of an organizational like culture adoption. You need kind of champions for security in each department. Everybody kind of takes ownership of security. You don't really think about it as an afterthought, but you kind of incorporate it into all the decisions you make. It's good to kind of keep security in the front of your mind because that really could impact your brand reputation as well, the company reputation, and that might even be more damaging itself than maybe data getting out. Well, I mean, I guess it's together they're the same thing. Data gets out, that's going to impact your brand reputation, and you're going to lose sales and things. But yeah, you might not be trusted. I mean, I don't have much say in Equifax itself. They kind of just have our information, but if I could choose not to have them out there, I would prefer that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would rather,
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on what data they have and what data gets leaked. Obviously, there's the big one that's at the forefront of everybody's mind, which is like credit and personal information, medical information, stuff like that. But sometimes that data is your product for some companies. You know what I mean? And so if you've been working to mine and collect this data, and you're selling it as a product or access to it as a product, you could just be out of business.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. I say to me, it's the situation with security is the way it used to be with like documentation and testing. Like whenever somebody was running up against a deadline, first thing to go, documentation. Second thing to go, testing. We can test it later. We can document it later. And of course, later never comes, and so security is kind of, unfortunately, for a lot of people, falls into that same thing. We've got a deadline. We've got to get it out the door. We'll check the security stuff later. And of course, later never comes, because then after you're done, you get it out the door, then it's like, oh, we need this new feature added and this other feature added, so it's unfortunate, but that does seem to be the case.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, like, yeah, again, it's kind of adopting a lot of layers of security, essentially. So like building that into your pipelines. I mean, we're talking about stuff that is testing your code, looking for, how much your code smells, looking for vulnerabilities and things like that. But like implementing other areas, something I learned about recently is, I guess, the term called like the Swiss cheese methodology, which is, Swiss cheese has holes in it, right? So think about your security stack. There's holes in every layer, and the idea is not to essentially line your holes up. You have another slice that's there to test another aspect of your application. So you have your dynamic application security testing as well, stuff that runs after your code compiles and during runtime. So this is kind of things that like like OWASP or ZAP, something that's kind of monitoring in a running application or running against a running application, and just testing for security in other ways that you can't really get prior to having an application running. So that takes a strategy of having kind of multiple environments, so you can catch these vulnerabilities before it reaches later stages.
Yeah, security is done in layers, right? And it's that way so that if anything, if there is a mistake in, like, say, a firewall or a package or something like that, that you've got layers of protection. So, like, maybe you do have a vulnerable package that allows like a SQL injection or something like that. Well, maybe you've got a WAF, that can protect you from that. So you've got that extra layer. Or maybe your WAF is misconfigured and it allows SQL injection, but your packages are up to date, and they can identify and escape those things. So I like the Swiss cheese analogy.
You gotta have multiple pieces of the cheese and make sure your holes don't line up.
There you go.
I definitely, I really like all the food analogies in tech. I always said, like, security's done in layers. It's kind of like an onion. If you don't cut it right, you're gonna end up crying. But
yeah, I tell you, I think part of the thing about security too, and like, I totally agree with you, Derek, about shift it left. Part of the thing about security too is defaults are your friend. I mean, I've never met a developer yet that is, well, I take that back. I've met a few, but most developers aren't going to fight the defaults because they've got better things to do with their time than sit there and say, oh, well, this value isn't safe, but it's the default, so I'm gonna change it. They're just gonna go with what the default the language presents or the library presents or whatever it is. So if you build default into the library to say don't allow SQL injection here, like prevent parameterized query, don't allow it. You're already, like, so far ahead on the curve of being secure, because then the developers won't question that to figure out ways to work around it, ways that are safe and secure.
From an operations perspective, I often see the opposite, right? Where people don't have time to sit down and figure out the exact rules that they might need in, like, AWS IAM, for instance, and just give it, here's a star, wildcard everything, star, and it usually comes down to either lack of expertise, or more often than ever, it's lack of time, because projects are moving too fast, and like you said, like, the documentation gets dropped first, testing gets dropped second, security is probably third.
Yeah. I say I'm a big believer in make the defaults intelligent, and that can be really hard to do, of course, because you don't always know what's the best default to use in a particular case. But to me, it's like, that all by itself saves a lot of grief, not just in terms of security, but in terms of, like, code too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we brought this up last time. I'm really impressed with, there's, like, you can just do include SAST, I think is the thing, and GitLab, and it just, like, does a bunch of open source static code analysis scans. I'm just so impressed by them putting that out there and making it available to people. So it's really one of those things where you don't have to go pay SonarQube or Nexus hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to do static code analysis. There are all these tools out there that are open source and available to you. You just have to, and there's really not an excuse to say that we don't have time to set them up anymore either, because it's literally just in your pipeline. You say include this, and it's all done for you. So
yeah, typically, there's support for static code analysis for every major language that you might be writing your app in too.
Right.
So that, I mean, that's not an excuse in itself.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at Code Guru from AWS, and I really like it. It's a nice product, but their language. Last time I looked at it, and it's been probably a year. Their language coverage is really lacking. It's like Java, Python, and that's about it. Maybe JavaScript. Let's go check that. I'm going to go Google that real quick to make sure I'm not spelling misinformation.
I used to know a fella who worked with check marks. I asked him, I said, do you guys do anything? Do you do C# and Java, of course, right? But do you do Python and stuff like this? And it was just kind of like the market. And it makes sense. I mean, you know, most developers are doing C# and Java, right? So that's where we're going to direct our efforts. And then, you know, I think they may have done Python. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to, like, you know, tell people, oh, they do Python when I don't know. But definitely, there was definitely not like these more niche languages like F# and stuff like that were definitely not in their wheelhouse because, like, yeah, there's just not that much demand, you know.
Back on the Code Guru thing here real quick. It looks like it does support Java, JVM languages such as Scala and Kotlin, and Python's actually in preview. So not even fully supported with Python at the moment.
Oh, really? Yeah, I see it says Python 3 and above here for security detection.
Oh, is it? Okay. I'm looking at the FAQs.
I was looking at features, but yeah, either way, you know, that's not a lot of coverage, right? So, you know, those open source tools are still necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. So a thought crosses my mind as people depend more on like or may start depending more on things like GitHub Copilot and stuff like this. Well, how will that impact the security landscape? Because again, people are probably not going to look real closely at what they're getting from Copilot to see if it's secure or it isn't. You know, is that something that GitHub will try to build in, do we think, you know, say, you know, hey, we've got this machine learning thing that tells you what code you're most likely to want. Are we now going to modify it to say, okay, now this is not secure, so we're going to discard this suggestion, or what do you think?
I think if they're not doing static code analysis on the code that they're recommending, that's a massive injustice to the world. So I would only assume that they would be like somewhat responsible and be doing that sort of thing. I mean, could you imagine if, you know, like I think that would be a brand reputation and issue for them, you know, if they weren't doing that due diligence, but those are just assumptions.
Yeah.
GitHub did get bought by Microsoft, so.
True. Good point. Yeah, like I say, I just hope that you know, if people adopt it more, they you know, they go in with their eyes open and they're aware of the fact that just because Copilot recommends this code doesn't make it necessarily right or secure, and you need to pay attention to security. You know, even if Copilot doesn't, you do. You know.
Are you using Copilot a lot? Because I know you brought it up last week as well. I mean, I've never used it. Do you think that's something that developers are going to start relying on more?
No, I haven't used it either. Honestly, it's on my radar because I keep seeing people talking about it. Yeah, I gotta say, it seems to me over my career, I went from like C to C++ to you know, databases stuff and like this. And it seems every time we have a big shift in development, it's opening the possibility of building software to more people, which is a great thing. And I think Copilot is one of those things that's going to open the possibility of building software to more people. At the same time, though, the people that are building software, like when VB6 came around, all of a sudden, lots of people could build GUI software, and it was great, but they were building, you know, just the bare minimum thing that would work, and it in like tons of technical debt. And
that was actually my first, you know, programming was basically like a library checkout system in VB6.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's wonderful that it opens up the possibility to a lot more people. It's just like it also opens up a lot more technical debt because, you know, people are doing this as not like we're professional software developers. We do this all day. You know, these other people who are using VB6 at the point when it started were more like, hey, this is a way to automate this one part of my job that's not my main job. You know, and so they weren't concerned about like technical debt and stuff like that, which is fine. They should.
Well, you bring up VB6 and stuff like that, but I think my bigger concern is that, you know, with the advent of Node, we've got, you know, front end, like people that came from graphical, more like, you know, image design that ended up in, you know, front end JavaScript coding. They're now writing back end, which have access to the database and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So those are kind of some of my fears, but
that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point.
But, you know, you're right. It's
or anything. I have this awareness of it because it's been around for a while, you know?
Yeah. You know, we're over time here. I did want to just bring up one thing that I think is really important with that shifting left and getting security minded folks involved earlier in the process. I think the code owners inside of source control is a wonderful tool. And I want to just make sure that people are aware that it exists and that, you know, if a certain file changes within a repository, you can require review from specific people. So for things like, you know, coming from the ops world, you know, all of our infrastructure is built with infrastructure as code. So if we have a file that is, you know, sets up anything that has to do with security, we can, you know, tag a security member to get their review. You know, things like user groups or, you know, access permissions, security groups, networking, stuff like that. You know, I just want to make sure that people are aware that this thing exists and that they should be using it. Any other closing thoughts from anybody else?
I agree with you. I tell you, to me, and I think they said it in Pragmatic Programmers too, automate as much as you can, because computers don't forget steps. Computers don't miss steps. Human beings forget things and miss things, but if you automate it, like, you know, your security checks and stuff like this, it won't get missed. So that would be my final thought, I guess, on the subject.
Yeah, and you know, to that point, making sure that product and business understand that this automating those things takes time, but there's an immense value in it. You know, it may delay your release to make sure that you're building these things at the forefront. But you know, missing a deadline or your time to market is much better than getting out there fast and failing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, 100% agree. Put the work in first, and then, you know, you benefit from it more in the long run.
All right. Well, Onorio, I really want to you know, send a big thank you to you. I hope you've been enjoying lunch.
My pleasure, man. And yes, I love talking with other tech people. So this is great.
Well, all right. Well, you know, big thanks again to Ray, Kevin, you know, Joe for helping organize here. And I think with that, we'll close out today.
All right. Y'all have a good day.
You know.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.